somehow useful for you, we try to make it as much understandable as possible and as much close to your work as possible. First, let me introduce myself. My name is Mahulena Hoffman, or Hoffmanova, as you wish. I was born in Czechoslovakia. I studied law under the communist regime at the time. So I tried to find something which is not close to so much close to the politics. So I opted for something which is close to space and telecommunication. I did my PhD on remote sensing of the Earth from outer space, and then I almost had to stop working on this area because there was the fall of the wall of Bengal, and everyone was interested not so much what is happening in outer space, but what is happening in the legal systems of Eastern Europe. So with Russian and Czech, you can reach almost every Slavic language. So I started reporting for 20 years for the Max Planck Institute in Heidelberg for the developments in Eastern Europe. But at the same time, I was always following also what's happening in outer space and in telecommunications. Since 2011, I have a chair here in Luxembourg, the so-called SES chair, in space, telecommunication and media law, and together with Mark Cole I am chairing our legal master, which is dealing with, that's very kind of you.
Just continue, I'll try to fix it, I don't know what's wrong here.
Excellent. And we are having a specific program for law students, which deals with the details of the legal regulations on space and telecommunication. It is important for us because you know that Luxembourg is seat of not only SES but also of many startups and institutions which deal with outer space. So for these institutions it's very helpful having students who are already trained and who can start working with the Luxembourg Space Agency, or who can start working with the SES, making contracts with third countries, or working in Luxembourgish institutions. So it's quite fun. We have now the fourth run of our master course. We have around 20 to 25 students. It's a very nice class, and we are doing our best not to make the education too theoretical, because it does not help, but to make it as close to the real life as possible. So that's why I'm also here. If I may ask you to introduce yourself shortly, just giving me your background and perhaps where did you study, and perhaps telling me your area of interest. It would be very helpful to me as well in order to be able to accommodate to your needs. So would you be so kind, could you present yourself?
My name is Michelle Jerhozek. I grew up in the States. I went to Machine Tech for my first degree. I studied electrical and computer engineering. And I've been in Luxembourg for a long time.
Oh, thank you.
My name is Farzana. I have a background in chemical engineering and renewable energy engineering. And it's less than 1 year that I'm here with them.
I see. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Mariusz Zikowski. I came from Poland, and currently I live in Germany. My background is telecommunications and electronics engineering.
I see. What are you doing?
Now I'm studying.
Yes, but
in the past I was in the military service in Polish Army all the time. But it was concerned about the telecommunication centers, stationary and mobile.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Thank you.
I myself, Utsav Bharana. I come from India, Calcutta, and I was working for 5 years in the data management industry before I kind of chose to do my logistics and supply chain masters here at university last year. And my next masters is this one. And I have a keen interest in understanding more about space logistics and the data analytics side.
I see. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Vishwajit Gogoi. I'm from India. I was working for the last 6 years in Indian Space Research Organization as a propulsion engineer. I have a background in aerospace. For the last 1 year, I was basically handling spectrum management for Anthrax Corporation, which you may be aware, but it's embroiled in the Devas issue. So I was working there for VSAT terminals.
I see.
So this is my first master's.
Oh, great. Thank you.
I'm Dave van der Meer. I'm from Luxembourg. I studied mechatronics engineering in the Netherlands, and my main focus of interest would be robotics.
Oh, I see. Thank you.
My name is Natalia. I'm from Russia. I have my first degree in aircraft engineering. I was working in my country, then I switched to financial sector in my country, then I moved here. I was working here also in financial sector, and then I decided to switch again for my first education, and then I started that program. Здравствуйте.
Hi, my name is Zong Rui. I come from China. My bachelor degree is mechanical design, and I also got a master degree in art design in China. So I come to here to continue to study.
Thank you.
My name is Rod. I'm from Brazil. My background is control and automation engineering, programming as well. I'm here in Luxembourg since January. I was at IE, a sensors company. I was working with radar there. And now it's my first master's.
Oh, thank you. And could you introduce yourself, please?
Well, I'm one of the lecturers. I'm Truman. I'm going to teach the CubeSat course, but I do have an interest in law in general, and in particular also in space law. I was heavily involved with space law as an engineer.
Really? How did it happen?
Have you heard of a project called QB50?
Yes.
I was a project manager.
Oh, really?
While most of the ESA projects, ESA is taking care of the legal aspects. At the time, it was funded by the Commission. The Commission had no clue and no interest. They let us do everything.
I see.
And since it was international, we had actually had a number of intergovernmental agreements to actually make it happen. We had conflicts of terminology of space law in Belgium and, for example, Austria.
I can imagine.
The name operator is used in both laws differently, and you cannot satisfy both. We had then export-import challenges.
Of course.
If I may tell an anecdote about this.
Please.
If I produce something here and I bring it to another country, I export it here and import it there, and it may be or may not be subject to tariffs. If I bring a satellite to the United States and it kind of stays there, but actually it's not. And these import-export laws they want, for a legal transfer, export, you have to use an end-user statement. So the export-import laws assume I produce something here, when it crosses the border, I sell it, and these people there use it. In our case was this: we had a satellite, for example, from China, partially financed by China, partially financed by the European Commission through this Belgian entity, going to the Netherlands, where it's put into a box. It's being transported in the United States. It's then going to space. And it's used by that Chinese university.
It's very complex.
In essence, the laws just don't apply. No law foresees that it's crossing a border, remains the property of that organization. It's used by that organization without ever having left that country, a kind of left, but through an uncontrolled border because of space. And that's only a small part of the legal aspects I had to
Oh,
deal
that's
with.
interesting. That would be a very good moot court case for the Manfred Lachs moot court in space law.
Yeah. And this was, as I said, only one of the conflicts we had. And very often you see, if I may then be a little sarcastic about it, sometimes you have to push it with the lawyers and suddenly things move. Other cases, for example, if you deal with the Americans, a lot of the Americans, they cannot allow that that other laws than United American laws are applied. We were in the Belgium project, and we said we're not dealing with American laws, it's Belgian law, or you don't participate. And universities like Stanford, in the end, gave in and said, okay, well, what kind of
with closed eyes, something like that.
Because you cannot have compliance to everything at the same time.
No, that's true.
Anyway, I don't understand.
Thank you.
Your question, because I have a serious interest.
Okay, thank you.
So
Yes.
you did remote sensing first? Did you take a technical degree and then go into law?
No, I did. I started directly with the legal degree. So it was remote sensing, but put into the legal framework.
Okay.
It was in the 80s. So my technical knowledge is just from my secondary school, and then from some courses. I wanted to be a pilot of a small aircraft, so we had to learn how to operate radio station and so. So I have very basic technical knowledge, but all my career I spent with legal studies. So I'm more dependent on your technical knowledge. But having heard that some of you are interested in various parts of space law, I wouldn't convince you to go to our legal courses, but there might be some which could be of interest of you. We have in the telecommunication class, we have 2 lectures given by Attila Matas. Attila Matas was for 20 years the head of the ITU space communication sector. And he was responsible for the assignment of frequencies and the cases of harmful interference. So I will give you the dates, and you are mostly welcome just to join us in the class, but it's absolutely not compulsory. It's just if you would have time. Usually his lectures are very, very well done, and I decided this time to go and sit in his class as student as well. Usually I didn't have the time, but this time it should be possible. So it's in on the 15th of October from 1:15 in the Viker building. It's not far from here. It's one station of here close to Auchan. It's a big white building where also the Max Planck Institute is seated. So it's the seat of the Faculty of Law now. And it's in ground floor, room number C004. And then you will have the second part of this lecture on the 16th of October from 10 to 2 in the same building in C006.
Do you know how late the 15th of October lecture goes? The duration of the first lecture?
Oh, the first lecture is from 1:15 to 4:30, but usually they are ending earlier. But you can stay as long as you have time, so you are not obliged to be there the whole time. And the second one is from 9 to 13. Sorry, no, I'm sorry. Sorry, I saw another. So on the 15th of October from 13:15 to 17:15. And in C004. And on the 16th, it's from 10 to 2 in C006. And then we shall have a lecture of Tanya Mason-Zvan. She is professor at the University of Leiden. She will speak on small satellites, so let me know if it would be interesting for you. I will give you the dates. And we shall have lecture on Fabio Tronchetti, who is a professor in Beijing in China. And he will speak about Chinese space programs, and he will speak about protection of environment in outer space. If it would be interesting, I will give you the dates as well.
Is there a schedule for his lectures in some particular site? Or?
You will not reach it because it's open just for the students of the law. But what I can do, I have a print here and I can send it around.
White building.
A white building, ground floor. Say the room is say I don't know about the white building.
is the time? From 13:15 and then from 10 to 14. First day's time.
Excuse me?
13,
Yes.
15.
What is the name of the building that the classes are? The name
The
of the building?
building
It's next to
Biker
Auchan?
building.
17.
How do you say?
Biker.
Viker,
I should write
okay.
it down. So
For the home day.
it's the
17,
spacewalk
5.
course, and this one is
17.
the telecommunication.
Oh.
Yeah, it's the M1. No, it's the telecommunication.
But that
We can take a
we can go
Yes,
15.
Of course you can.
15 we can go because we have afternoon free according
the
to
name
now
of the
schedule.
building
And 16
is-
Oh, okay. It's in the...
And it's Rue 4, Rue Alphonse Weiter. But it's just on the side of the Allée de Kennedy, and it's close to the Auchan. So we are going to buy our meals in Auchan, so it just across the street.
Okay, nice.
So, what about the exams? You are already grown-up people, you are not so much interested in exams. Our students usually are. So, I got used to explain how the exams will be organized. So, we have been told by the vice rector that it's not neat to examine you in learning something by heart or and then have a classical exam. It would be just ridiculous. So the colleague of mine, Dr. Blount and I, who are going to give this course, decided to make 3 projects which you will be asked to present in the last lecture of the course. And so it will be a group work. And we decided, he is American, so he is very fond of having law firms everywhere. His idea is to divide you into 3 groups, which will work as law firms at the end. So you will be 3 law firms, and 1 law firm which present the procedure of authorization of a space project. Because for every space activity, if you are launching any space object, you need some sort of authorization. And we shall show you how it works in Luxembourg. We shall show you in comparative way how it works in other countries. So one task will be to present a request for authorization. Then the second task, those who are specialists in telecommunication, you know that you cannot operate any radio station without having a license. So for the smallest thing, which is emitting some radio waves, you need some sort of licensing. And again, we would like to show you how to get this license, which is the authority responsible, which documents you need to do so, and how it works in the practice. So it will be the second group. And the third group, I had a chance to be one of the evaluators of the Horizon 2020 projects, which dealt with space. And I have to confess that I was very surprised that the European Union is not only checking the value of the project for the research, it's not only checking the legal compatibility with the European law, but it's checking also the ethical aspects. And I didn't know what they would like me to do, because I was not aware that there could be any ethical aspects. If the activity is of non-military nature, there should not be any ethics with it. But the European Union developed a series of criteria which they consider to be important when applying for European projects. One of the criteria which I learned is, for instance, that you cannot involve people from poorer countries giving them only non-substantial salary. So such situation would exclude your project from European financing, correct? Or for some biological products, you are not allowed to perform some genetic experiment. So again, it would exclude your project from the scale. So I thought it would be quite interesting to have a look on these criteria, what the European Union considers to be ethical criteria, ethical parameters. And the third group would be asked to make an application to the Horizon 2020, which is already passed, but there will be other ones, and just to try to cope with this ethical criteria. So it will be your exam. It will take in the last lecture of this series, and by that you are done.
Can I ask a
Please.
question to the group?
Of course.
Since we talked about authorization of ground station, is anyone here having a radio amateur license? I'm thinking of you or you.
Me.
You have it?
Yes.
You got it here in Luxembourg?
No. Many years ago.
It could be useful for the CubeSat project later. That's going to be part of her lecture. If you want to send signals, radio signals, then we need a permission. And if you are a radio amateur, there's a certain frequency band reserved. If you have a license, you can use that for your experiments. For example, for your experimental CubeSat. So it's heavily used for experimental satellites like CubeSat. And if we start some research, it'd be good if somebody had. So I invite you to operate the ground station. There is a course here. It's actually starting next Monday, Tuesday. But it's not an issue for time. Just was curious.
Okay, great. So it will be the exam. This question which I would like to raise to you: do you have any specific field of interest? Is there anything which I should prepare or we should prepare for you as a specific issue?
Is there any rules for protecting the space from environmental protecting the space?
Yes, they are. Would it be interesting for you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And in general, what we need to know, I don't have any experience in the regulatory aspects of space exploration or launching.
Okay.
So that's
okay. Great. So yes.
Maybe we can also add a small chapter about crime in space, like the case that was recently in the ISS station.
I see. Good idea. Just a second. I shall note it down.
and privacy would be.
So the first one was the protection of environment. Crime in space. Further ideas.
Collaboration between countries.
International collaboration or
Idea.
Maybe about international conflicts between some nations,
okay.
if there are.
Good question. Perhaps you will have other ideas during the course. You can let me know. And then tell me how you would like to organize this afternoon. When would you like to stop? When would you like to have breaks? So the course is scheduled from 2 to 6:15. For me, I think it's a very long time. So would you prefer to have shorter breaks and then to finish earlier, or would you like to have long breaks and to finish in time? What is your preference?
I would say earlier.
Short breaks.
Yeah, I'd say earlier.
Okay, shorter breaks and finish earlier.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. And is there anyone who is elected for the contact with the professors? Have you elected your representative already?
Not yet.
Okay, not yet, because usually it's quite useful. I can give you the telephone number, and if something goes wrong, the student can directly call me or contact me. But perhaps it will come later. So, what about the literature? So, in fact, I am not allowed to advertise my own book, but in fact, it is the most recent book on telecommunication and space law. We published it with my colleague Tanya Mason-Zvan and from Leiden, and it appeared in Kluwer this year. But there are many other interesting space law introductions, like from Franz von der Dung from Nebraska. It's a very good handbook to space law. Or there is a whole series of books published in Cologne in Germany, which is called a Commentary to Space Law. Otherwise, you will find a series of our books which we published here in Luxembourg. We are in fact organizing annual colloquia on space and communication law, usually together with SES. And we are publishing always the books of it. So we have a specific book on harmful interference, we have a specific book on space communication, and so on. So they are my recommendation for literature, but you will find many information in the internet. I wouldn't completely refuse if you are working with Wikipedia, but you know that not every information there is reliable. The references can be useful, which bring you further to the literature or to the original sources. We shall give you all the slides of the PowerPoint presentation into Moodle, so I don't think that you have to buy books here at the moment. And when we shall speak about the space treaties which were adopted by the states in the framework of the UN, you will find those on the website of the United Nations Office on Space Activities. The website is there. And if you are searching for ITU documents, you will find them on the ITU website, including the main legal documents like the ITU Constitution, Convention, Radio Regulations. So, what are the subjects of the lecture? Today, our lecture is rather introductory. On 16th of October, you will listen to Dr. Blount, he will speak about the space policy. He is a colleague of mine who came from the University of Mississippi and is the specialist in space and telecommunication law. We are working very closely together and are replacing each other. And then on the 30th of October, we shall speak about the authorization of space activities. Then on the 20th of November, we shall speak about licensing radio stations. On the 27th of November, we shall speak about ethical aspects, and at the end, on the 4th of December, it will be your presentations and the conclusion.
Can I ask
Yes.
one question? You mentioned about the presentations. Where we should start working on it? The last 4th of December, or we should start before, earlier? I don't know, 16th of October, or when?
So I thought that we shall give you all the basics to this in the class.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea is that you spend or that you do your homework, so to say, already in the class.
Okay.
Most probably you will have to meet with your group close to the 4th of October to discuss who is presenting what, or whom you have chosen to present your group work. but I think you will start working on this from now.
So we need to choose now. I mean, not today, right now, but
not yet. You can give me your preferences later. But we shall start about informing you about these procedures already from today.
Okay.
So if you are making your notes, so you are already preparing your homework.
Okay.
And I'm very also happy that you asked, because feel free to interrupt me in any moment. I can perhaps be lost in some long talk, so let me know if something is not completely clear. So I should start to speak about the impact of space activities to society, but you might know more about it than I do. From our perspective, always the space activities were boosting not only the research or development, but they were also boosting the discussions about our society, about our religion, about other civilization. These discussions did not take place or do not take place only in the media, but they take place also in the United Nations on the floor of the UN Committee for Outer Space. They take place in COSPA, which is a committee for space research. That's the committee which deals with the environmental aspects of space activities. And they take place in SETI. Do you know what is SETI?
It's a program for establishing other form of life in the space.
Exactly, yeah. It's a program for organization for searching other lives, form of life in outer space. And also this discussion takes place on a national level if we speak about the data protection, or if we speak about the uses of outer space activities for military purposes. So what were the models for some setup of exploring and use of outer space? So the first important impetus was so-called geophysical year, which took place in 1957-58, which to my surprise brought together, despite of the Cold War, the scientists from both parts of the Iron Curtain, and helped to boost really the discussions not only on outer space but also on the use of Antarctic and the sea. One of the consequences of the International Geophysical Year was adopting so-called Antarctic Treaty. So what do you think, what was the reason why Antarctic could serve as model for outer space? What do they have similar, or what do they have common?
No one owns the property, and
exactly, no one owns. Yeah. What about the environment for human beings?
Extreme.
Extreme, yeah, difficult. Yeah. And so that's why it was said, before we start developing something from the scratch, let's have a look how it was settled in Antarctic. So you know that in fact in Antarctic there were territorial demands of some adjacent states like Chile or New Zealand and so, which were close to. But it was said, let's freeze them, don't take them seriously. Let's pretend that they are no territories. And as long as this treaty is still in operation, there will be no territoriality. So you can move from A to B without crossing any borders. And it was said, this environment is so hostile that it should be some sort of measures which would protect this environment and which would protect the people there. So it was freedom of research. Every state can perform research on its own, but let's prohibit any military uses. Let's prohibit any military uses. On Antarctic, you are not allowed to create any military installations. You are not allowed to perform any testing of, let's say, nuclear materials. And you have to take care of the environment. This Antarctic Treaty was later amended by a huge protocol which says that the environment in Antarctic has to be kept pristine, has to be kept clean, and the states adopted a lot of measures what to do with the waste, how to protect the animals, and so on. What is interesting from my perspective, this protocol has completely prohibited any mining on Antarctic. So it is not allowed, which makes problem for our thinking on behalf of space mining on celestial bodies, which is not prohibited. But there are colleagues who say, but have a look in Antarctic, it's prohibited and it's working well. So let's try to transform this prohibition also to outer space. It did not happen. But the opponents of space mining are using Antarctic's model for saying it's working well and let's expand it to outer space. The second model, yes please.
In the Antarctic there are also animals, but are there also laws for animals in space even there are no animals?
No, they are not. There is no any provision which would deal with life elements in outer space. There is one interesting provision. We don't know whether there is a life or not. And to prevent that we might bring some, and yes, please correct me, to bring some bacteria or to bring some life elements to the Earth, which other organisms would not be able to cope with. So it is prohibited to, so-called back contamination is prohibited. So if you would impact celestial, if you would just flee around, you will most probably not catch any foreign bacteria. Or it's not bacteria, they are some, what would be the right expression? Some origins of life?
Form of life, yeah, any form of life.
Any form of life, thanks. So most probably on the orbit it would be highly improbable. But if you would be impacting, and if you would, we know that on the moon there is water, so we don't know whether there could be perhaps some forms of life. So when you would be impacting with your space objects and would bring it back, you will have to take any precautionary measures to avoid the possibility of contaminating the Earth. On the other hand, it is also prohibited so-called forward contamination, meaning that if you are going to launch a space project which goes into outer space, you are obliged again to take quarantine or precautionary measures to avoid that you bring human material to outer space. And I was really surprised what's the reason behind this, and I was told that the reason is the research that it sounds to me ridiculous, but I heard that it is the real reason that if we would bring some humans forms of life to a celestial body, and then it would be forgotten, so to say. And then in 15 years later, an expedition would come, and they would search for life, and they would find human bacteria or forms of life. They would be absolutely excited because they would think that they found some forms of life. So this measure should avoid the mistakes in research. You had a question.
Yes, I wanted to ask that how it's possible to check that we didn't leave anything there already, because a lot of people, so it was a lot of missions, so that it's not contaminated already. So how it's possible to check that?
So it's difficult. There is an international committee which is called COSPAR, COSPAR, and it is a committee of researchers who are developing the standards for each space mission or for each category of space mission, which are highly respected. These standards are not binding, they are just recommendatory.
Mm-hmm.
But the space agencies, I heard, are highly respecting them because they would compromise their own research. So there is a common interest to have some standards respected by everyone. Yes, please.
Now, just adding on to her question. So, as you were mentioning, the government space agencies are basically quite wary about these standards, even though they cannot be, they are more like statutory standards, they cannot be implemented as such or in a particular code of law. So, but then the recent lander that we had from Israel, the Beersheba lander which crash landed there, it was actually carrying tardigrades, which are basically bacteria, which survives, which can very comfortably survive on the moon. And but then we, I guess, don't have any law by which we can, because they kind of flouted the rule that we cannot carry bacteria, but then they actually did it. So can we actually reprimand them or punish them, or is there any provision for such a thing?
So the question is, yeah, there is a provision which prohibits the forward contamination. It's Article 9 of the Outer Space Treaty. The question is whether they did everything to prevent it, or whether it was their fault. Yeah, as lawyers, we are asking always: did the person do everything which was in his or her capacities to prevent it, or was it just vis maior and they could not do anything about it? So it would be the first question which a judge would try to find out. And the second question is, I am not sure whether Israel is party of the Outer Space Treaty. I have to check. If they are not bound by it. So again, it would be difficult to find Israel. I shall have a look in the brain.
Where does basically where does any case go to? Does it go to International Court of Justice or?
Not yet. Not yet. The International Court of Justice would love to have a case in outer space. The judges, several of them are very well trained in space law, and we know it because they are judging the finals of the so-called moot court competition, which is the students from all the countries, more than 100 teams, are playing that they are in court. So they are playing in national rounds, they are playing in regional rounds, and the finals are judged by the real ICJ judges. So I had an opportunity to speak with the Slovak judge Tomka. He is excellent in space law because he is expert in international environmental law. So he would love to have a case. The Chinese judge, she is also specialist in space law. And I know also the Russian judge who is also very knowledgeable. So they would love to. But until now there was no such case. All possible conflicts were settled amicably. And the real conflict which had a potential to be an international law conflict was the crash of the Soviet Cosmos in Canada with nuclear power source, and which started to expose the radiation. But before the Canada could make a case of it, the Soviet Union immediately paid all the costs for the cleaning of the area. So there was no need. So the states are dependent on each other. So before bringing the case to the judge, which is usually very cumbersome, very costly, it took ages, and at the end you don't know whether the decision will be implemented or not. They try to find a compromise and negotiate. It's more effective. So back to these COSPAR rules. So they are developing categories for each group of space flights, like the orbiting, flyby, impacting, and so on. And they are together with researchers from other countries, and this body is really highly recognized. They are developing precise standards for how many sporas can be let on the quadrat millimeter or centimeter of body of the satellite during the production, for instance, or how it must be clean when it's brought back, so how long the quarantine does have to take place, which cleanest requirements have to be respected. And in fact, each bigger or space agency has its own so-called planetary officer, who are usually biologists, and who are taking care that these rules are really observed. What we are afraid of are the perhaps poorer countries which are also developing some space activities, and we are asking whether they have enough to invest into this planetary protection. But it is really an international network which takes care of it. But it's interesting your remark on the Israeli satellite. I have to check whether they are part of the Outer Space Treaty or not. It will be interesting.
Is there any organization that supervises these activities?
Yes. Yeah. It's the United Nations. And the United Nations has its own committee for outer space. And it is this United Nations is keeping the registry of space objects, all space objects launched in outer space, and if there are any problems, so the issue is discussed on the floor of this committee. Not every country is member of this committee. Luxembourg joined only 2004. But it's quite interesting forum, quite good forum for discussions.
Professor?
Yes, please.
So these laws were looked at before creating the laws for space. And I'm sure when they were drafted, because these are already pretty old,
Yes.
you had amendments to make. So which was the organization which was kind of doing that?
So in the case of Antarctic, it was a conference of the member states. It was not the United Nations. There were interested states who met just for adopt this legal framework. And in case of the law of the sea, it was the UN who was instrumental, United Nations.
I meant to ask for the space. Like they looked at these sea and Antarctic law to create laws for space.
I shall come to this.
Okay.
So now we are leaving Antarctic, and we are asking why it is also the law of the sea which serves as a model. It is right that the convention was adopted in 1982, but the first principles were adopted already in the 16th or 17th century. You know that the law of the sea started developing from Netherlands. It was Hugo Grotius who came with the idea of mare liberus, saying that the sea is free for everyone. So why do you think that the sea is also a model for outer space?
The international sea does not belong to any nation.
Exactly.
Therefore, it's shared between nations.
Exactly. So it is the principle of the law of the sea that there are no territories, except of 12 miles, which are the territorial sea, and then we have other economic zones and so on. But the high seas are free for everyone. And there is also one aspect which is interesting for us from the perspective of space mining.
Fishing is not allowed.
Pardon?
Fishing is not allowed in the high seas.
It is allowed. It is in principle allowed, but there is something which for the opponents of space mining serves as a model where they say, but there is a model of exploiting, do you know what? Of the sea soil,
Yes,
of the seabed. And it is in the 80s when the sea treaty was created. At that time, it was the big movement of the so-called non-aligned countries, or developing countries, as you wish, who said, we don't want that only rich countries are taking out the minerals from the sea soil. So we need some sort of guarantee that when we have the technology, there is still something. And at the time, the states decided, okay, let's not allow everyone to mine from the sea soil, from the seabed. Let's create a specific organization which is situated in Jamaica, in Kingston, composed of representatives of various states, and if someone would like to mine from the sea soil, he or she has to come to us, to Jamaica, ask for license. We are going to contemplate about it, and if the licensee pays, and if we are content with the description and technical parameters and environmental protection, so we shall give the permission to dig out from the sea soil. It was a good meant, but in fact, until now, from the 80s, this whole system of this whole organization, which is very costly, distributed in principle around 20 licenses altogether. There are two companies from Russia, one company from Czech Republic, Slovakia, Poland, which is seated in Szczecin. I think one from Germany and the rest from other countries, from China, I think as well. Why? Because it turned out that this project is much more technologically difficult than one thought in the beginning. It is not so easy to go with a ship to the areas where these minerals can be found, to go very deep into the sea and to start any works on the soil. So it appeared that this system is too costly, too human resources costly, because you have the whole apparatus of international organization. The people are sitting there, they are inventing what to do because there are no applicants. So they are writing some research papers. You will find them on the website of the International Sea Organization, Kingston, Jamaica. So it's huge operators with secretaries and everything, but they don't have what to do. And so it's rather, for me, it's not an argument for pushing this type of organization as model for space mining, because it's costly, it's human resources costly, and it does not have any, we don't know whether we shall find anything in outer space in a short time period. So it would be too early, from my perspective, to create such a mechanism. Yes, please.
But the principle still holds that only the rich countries can do space mining right now, but then the poorer countries cannot. So that principle still holds even for outer space.
There is no mechanism which would prevent the technologically advanced countries not to go in for space mining. There is no such mechanism. In the UN, there are deliberations how the benefits from space mining could be distributed. But there is, until now, there is no such a model like in the ITU. We have such regulations that each country has a right to have its own slot on geostationary orbit and so on. But we don't have such a mechanism in the law of outer space. So there is nothing preventing the country to go ahead. But it is not prohibited. It would be just perhaps an issue of ethics that such country which has such technology would offer the people or the companies from poorer countries, for instance, participation in its projects, or would offer the place for studies, or would involve the participants from less rich countries to in the project. But there is nothing which would prohibit. So this model of the law of the sea, just to sum up, serves as a model in twofold perspective. The first one, the fishing is free, so you can catch the fish from the high seas, and you can own it, you can possess it, you can sell it. And the second, as a negative example, it is the mechanism of the licensing for excavating minerals from the sea soil. Do you have any questions to this part?
Do you think there's lack of rules for this part? Because usually that companies can hire some employees for poor countries to work with them, but I think that is not sufficient, because there will be a lot of benefits that also rich countries can have, but the poor ones will remain poor because lack of technology. I think that there will be some rules to supervise this, because if, I think it's my viewpoint, if the human being reach the moon for mining, they won't stop it until, in my vision, ruining all of it.
You think so? Why? Why would they do this?
Because there's not any rules, there's not any, no one prohibit them, so they continue, and no one knows that's what will happen. Even if there wouldn't be any control on it, they can, just like the Earth, we are facing climate change and other stuff, and there hasn't been any rules to control environmental activity, commercial activities and industrial activities since now. So the human have ruined the planet. So I think it's the same story for the space.
Greed.
What do you think?
Greed.
Yes? So, but who should be the institution controlling?
I don't know any international institution to at least control and supervise these activities, and I use it that there is, but no one prohibits these companies to go forward there and to mine and research, and that's, I think that there should be some supervision on these activities.
But until now it's functioning since the 50s without such strong control. And it's functioning quite well, I think.
Oh yeah, but
Because
the point
no
is
one-
that the situation has changed. So now we are here, the first students of the master program, and we always hear that the situation has changed. Because the first time the Americans went to America, it has been just a first step and for research things. But now there's the companies and the private section sees the space as an opportunity to get benefit, and they are industrial creation is happening in this section. So it's not the same story as 50 years ago. It is changing, and I think that the rules should be prepared to face.
I think it's an interesting point because 50 years, as she's saying, till 50 years till now, we are not seeing such a thing as commercial benefit out of space. There are spin-offs, but there's no direct benefit. But then now what we are trying to do is something, bring about complete commercial benefit in terms of extraction and exploitation of resources. So when such a thing comes, when commercial companies come, so we have ethics on one side, but then at the end of the day, it's profit. And it's profit of a natural resource which belongs to everybody, but how does it get shared by people? So
I absolutely agree with what you are saying. I am just astonished that you are afraid of the potential negative impact of space mining, which could start coming perhaps in some 15 years, and that you are not afraid of the present military uses of outer space. It makes me much more nervous, I have to say, than some smaller robot trying to dig out several centimeters of soil on an asteroid. For me, it's much more dangerous to have deliberate explosions in outer space to test
But then I
weapons.
think-
Sounds frightening too.
sorry to interrupt, but I think it is like a precursor to what we are doing in the seas. For example, like the Convention of the Law in the Sea, I think even the United States is not a signatory of this, is it?
It is not.
The China is not a signatory of this. So countries which have the muscle power are not signatories of this. They don't respect this law anyway. So the same thing is happening in space too now. And that's why the American ships and fleets can roam around without ever being bounded by this law. So in space, the same thing is happening. France is we are trying to basically build our own military zone in space, so that the next step, which is basically mining, we are kind of preparing ourselves that we know our zone, that we can have control over this zone. Because for mining, we need to keep space stations, we need to keep areas which are completely under our control. And I think today, India, even for that matter, India has always been playing catch up in terms of space, let us say, but then when it came to actually militarization, it kind of took a lead before France. So I think this is mainly because we are trying to protect our zone just like in the sea. So it is already happening. And if a law is not there which actually is fair to everybody, this is bound to happen. I mean, it is just an extension of what we are seeing in the seas today. It is getting extended to space. And maybe as we explore more towards a larger solar system as a whole.
But I am very grateful for your remark, but it's difficult to impose on the states limits on their freedom of using of outer space. Because even if we would create a draft of international treaty, so it would be just the simplest way not to ratify it. And then what would help if the treaty would be ratified by a couple of states without the space actors? So we have to try to find some sort of compromise to convince also the space actors to participate in. In the case of the sea agreement, sea treaty, the US started to be party of the treaty, but when the US government saw in which direction it's going to develop, they would have to ask for each permission to make a research on the soil. They just make a reservation. They said, we are not going to be part of this chapter, which deals with the Jamaica institution, and they are not bound. China is party, but not US. So US can buy, they are also having such projects close to the America's coast. So they are already having such projects. Concerning the law, it's more complex. Perhaps I should show you one treaty which is completely unsuccessful, which tries to solve the problem. So in 1979, at the same time as the Sea Law Convention was elaborated and adopted, the UN elaborated a draft of so-called Moon Agreement. The title is not the right one because this treaty deals with Moon and other celestial bodies. So it deals with every asteroid or whatsoever. And it says that, and I shall point out just to answer your question. It says that space is common heritage of mankind, and then when mining on space on celestial bodies will become possible, an international regime should be created. And this international regime is in fact the same as the regime of the sea soil. It should give some sort of authorization for each project. It should say how the assets from outer space should be distributed. Only 20 countries have ratified this Moon Treaty. No US, no China, no Great Britain, no Russian Federation, no France. They are Netherlands, Belgium, Venezuela, Cuba, Mexico, and some others. The only spacefaring nation is Australia, which has its own important space program. Austria has ratified as well. So now these countries are really unhappy because in Netherlands, for instance, they have several startups which would like to open the projects for space mining. But they cannot because they cannot be authorized because Netherlands is bound by this treaty. And they say we cannot do anything because we have to wait on some sort of abstract international regime which will tell us how to behave. And this regime is not coming and not coming and not coming because no one is interested in it. So last year we had here also the king of Netherlands with his wife Maxima, and they were interested in your master program, in the preparation. So we were speaking to them, and the king, knowing that there are all the media around, he says, couldn't we quit this stupid Moon Agreement? So everyone, he said so, and he's violating his own law because the Netherlands is a party, but he really is convinced that it is not a good idea to have a regime like this because it's binding the hands to the firms, to the startups. So it's another perspective to your question. Yes, please.
Yes, about this agreement. But why it works then if some countries doesn't participate? Why they just cannot finish it? Because if some part of the countries doesn't respect this, why they should do that? Why they just cannot stop it. I mean, how does it work? Because they created one agreement and they follow, but in other countries doesn't follow that, and why it's not possible then just to finish it, because it doesn't work. It's proven that it doesn't work.
Yeah, but for many countries, they see it as argument that there must be some sort of international regime. So they think that even that at least for those countries who are party of this agreement, it's important, and except of Netherlands, and it should be there in order to show the direction for the others.
But then it looks like that now US, China, Russia, France and other countries go to divide the moon, and then for that countries will be nothing. So they will not be able to go to do something. Because they have, the other countries doesn't follow that agreement, and these countries should do that. So it's like
it's more like Paris Climate Accord. Like US is not a part of it, but other countries are. So you can't really do anything about US trying to come to it and sign it. And even if Germany has signed it to say that they will reduce their emissions, they're kind of the worst country in the list itself. Because US on the other hand has adopted technologies which has automatically reduced its emission. But like other countries are still not up to that.
Yes, but it's look like that they should protect something, but it protects nothing finally, because in other countries can do whatever they want because they don't need to follow that.
I think it's similar to the European Union. Not every country is part of the Union, so they are not bound to the law.
Well, but at least it's here, we are moving around, and in the space there is no one, so it's like, I don't know.
There are 2 points which I would like to raise. The one is, and we shall come to this slightly later, there is a prohibition of national appropriation of outer space. So you cannot get any territory in outer space. It's prohibited. Mm-hmm. And so it's not possible to colonize celestial bodies. Yes?
It is prohibited by whom?
Yes.
By the Outer Space Treaty. I didn't have time to show you.
And all the countries are following that.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's prohibited. And then the second issue is there are efforts how to create an international regime. And one of the efforts is so-called the Hague Space Resources Working Group. It was initiated by Netherlands. Luxembourg is very much involved in, and this group is composed from representatives of states, of international organizations, but also of operators. And it was important to have those who are the participants of this project. And this Hague group developed so-called Hague building blocks, which say how this regime should look like. And I can tell you that the issue how to create a regime of distribution of benefits was one of the most troublesome, because at the end no one knows. No one knows. Because even the representatives of not as rich countries, they don't know what they should require. Should they require money? But how? Today's these activities are in the stage of preparation, so there is nothing which can be distributed. And if a country would perhaps let's say in the best case scenario. So let's say a Czech company, because I'm originally from Czech Republic, not to be nasty to any other citizen. So a Czech company would find something useful on an asteroid, would be able to dig it out, and would be able to refuel some space object. So, how would you like to distribute the benefits to all the humanity?
It's valid, but there are 2 points, I think. One point is, as you said, distributing the benefits, and one, in my point, most important is how to protect our natural environment from over mining or it's like that. How questioning how we can distribute the benefit of deforesting the Amazon. It's not a good thing at all.
Of course.
We should not do it, and if there is any benefit, no one. The benefits are less important than the disadvantages.
Of course, I
So
agree.
I think that in this stage, that's no one knows that what will happen, and is it at all beneficial or not. It's important to protect and have the rule to protect the natural.
I agree. I absolutely agree. And I can tell you that the majority of national space laws, as the British or Netherlands or Belgium, they require the operators, when applying for authorization, to state how they are protecting the environment. So, for instance, the operator of a satellite in Luxembourg has to present, when asking for license for concession, he or she has to say what will happen with the satellite after the lifespan of the satellite. So whether it will be placed on the graveyard orbit, or whether it will have some remnants of fuel and it will be capable to go into the Earth's orbit to bloom. So the operators have to present how they are going to protect environment. And it's controlled by the national authorities. But I agree that it should be perhaps more outspoken on the international level. I think it would be a good idea.
I would like to understand one thing. That is basically till now we have been going to outer space and collecting samples and bring it back for research purpose. And that has always been the property of the country which extracts it. For example, Japan went with the Hayabusa, the Apollo missions. So the law that Luxembourg passed in 2017, which basically says that whatever you mine in space belongs to the company. So how is that law different from what the national law already allows for example?
How is the law?
How is this law that
Yes.
Luxembourg has different from what we have been doing till now? Like for example, the Apollo missions, they brought moon rock and back to the US, and it's a property of the US. They can decide, yeah, we can give some to Europe, but then it belongs to the property of US. So now Luxembourg has a law which actually allows them to do this.
Yes.
So why is this law significant here in Luxembourg, I'm saying, internationally? Because other countries, without this law, because startups are not coming to Luxembourg only because of, not only because, but because this law is basically a good, it's something that attracts startups to come here. But then if you start it from another country, from let's say from Japan, but they can still do the same thing, right? Without this law, because.
So perhaps I have this law here with me because I was working together with 3 international colleagues on the study which was the basis for this law. So we were having a look whether it corresponds present international law or not. And so what makes it different? So first, it is not the only law in the world which allows the operator to own the minerals when they are under the jurisdiction of Luxembourg. They must be under the jurisdiction of Luxembourg. The first law in which allowed this was the US law, which was adopted 2015, which is Commercial Space Act. It's an amendment of the US legislation. it was the first legislation which said, 2015, that the space minerals can be subject to ownership, can be owned, possessed, sold, and so on. So it was the first one. Luxembourg was only inspired by this legislation, and in order to attract mostly research and development to Luxembourg, it was the purpose. So it was deliberated that each investment to go in outer space for space resources can be very risky. You need high investment. So to give the operator any guarantee that he or she can do something with these minerals, it was included in this legislation that space minerals can be owned. In other countries, like in Japan, they are preparing the same legislation that will be also possible. In United Arab Emirates, they are preparing the legislation, and I don't know excluded. I cannot exclude that it will not be possible also in other countries. So in fact, the Luxembourg has decided only for operators under its jurisdiction. It could not decide for others, so it's only for Luxembourg. If India would adopt legislation like this, that space resources are susceptible to be appropriate, it would be also possible. So the operator operating from Luxembourg knows that the investment was not in vain, but he or she can make any use of the minerals. That the minerals have not to be brought back to Luxembourg and put a museum.
So they should use the minerals
The law does not speak, does not settle this outspoken, but it is believed that 90% of the activities will take place in outer space, that these minerals will be used in outer space for on-orbit operations or for some development of structures and so on. For 3-dimensional printing. So I propose a short break, and let's meet in a couple of minutes.
Can I ask something? Does anybody have an Android charger with them?
Which recharger?
Android charger.
Android? No, I have iPhone.
Two-sided USB.
Yeah.
You do?
How much time do you have for a break?
You decide.
You want the cable?
When you are back.
Yeah, the USB-C.
I think we need